Okay. Just give ourselves a couple of moments to allow everyone to enter before we start this webinar. Welcome to all of those joining us today for the second in the series of webinars by the SWForum.eu project on the marketing and technology readiness levels activity. So today's webinar, Understanding Criteria for Optimal Self-Assessment of Project Outcomes Using Market and Technology Readiness Levels. I'm David Wallum from the University of Oxford, one of the organisations that primarily developed marketing and technology readiness levels. And I'm going to be talking you through today's webinar. So just a brief overview of the format of today. I'm going to give you a brief recap on what MTRL is. This is the second in the series, and the first webinar, which is available through our online platform, gives a fuller version, but I'm going to tell you what MTRL is again. I'm then going to start discussing the questions that we actually utilize to capture information on the project or product that we're actually assessing, and then how we calculate the technical readiness level, market readiness level, and marketing and technologist readiness level product. Once we've gone through those questions and gone through the little bit of maths about TRL, MRL, and MTRL, I'll talk a little about interpreting the results. I'm aiming to finish the webinar at about 10 to 3, and I'm hoping that we could have quite a vibrant question and answer session at the end. So let's move on to the first section of this webinar. So MTRL, a recap. So when we think about our requirements on research and innovation projects, then there are a number of different criteria or measures of success that we have to think about. But key amongst these are, of course, outcomes that may occur after the end of the project. You know, impact, exploitation, sustainability, and possibly reuse. And these are all things that are founded on the project when it was actually in operation, but all occur after the end. You know, and when we think about this, the criteria and the reasons why these occur, why these happen, are many. But there are a number that are very clear, that have to be satisfied. You know, what comes at the end of the project, if somebody's going to reuse it, of course, the output, the outcome must be fit for whatever is being suggested in its reuse. If somebody wants to lift a product or outcome from a project, then of course, it has to be ready to actually be exploited. It has to be able to be accessed. If it be a software product, for example, the code needs to be accessible, there needs to be documentation. And of course, if you're starting and building one project on top of the outcomes of another, then you need to understand the level of maturity of that first project's outcome. If the project or the product is unfortunately not mature enough, you could actually waste a significant amount of time by trying to build your new product on a foundation of sand, essentially. So what is marketing and technology readiness? Well, as its name suggests, it is a mix of two things. It's a mix of technology readiness levels, which is a fairly well understood measure of maturity of technology, and market readiness levels, i.e. how ready a product or service is for launching into the market. And it is just a combination of those two that we brought together in a fairly unique way. Of course, what are the benefits of doing this? You know, everyone needs to understand what are the benefits because everyone's time is precious. You know, from the point of view of a funder, you may want to understand how well developed the projects are that you're supporting in their level of maturity. Are they actually going to output products, services, or outcomes that actually are in line with what they suggested and in line with your own expectations as a funder. That might mean, of course, that you highlight some projects that are not as well far forward, and you are then able to target support to those projects rather than apply it generally across the whole portfolio. Once you get as a project leader to a particular point in time in the development of your product or service, you want to actually disseminate this to outside interests. So to external stakeholders and making sure that there is a method that can stop. You need to understand, that you can publish a measure that external stakeholders can see and understand very clearly. And of course, as a project owner, one of the clear things that you want to happen is you want your project to succeed. If you're able to see measures at relevant points in time in the development process, then you can minimize risk of failure. From that point of view, having this single score as a point of reference to us seems a very, very beneficial thing to be able to do. So just quickly, of course, technical evaluation, TRLs, these are very well understood. And you can see on the right-hand side, TRL, a score from 0 to 9, gives you an idea where 0 is the idea that nothing's actually been developed, right the way through to a full commercial application. It's incredibly widely used, including by the Horizon 2020 and the Horizon Europe programs, to understand the technical readiness of products or services and projects they're supporting. Market readiness levels are organized in a similar manner, again with a score through from 0 to 9, where 0 is basically you think there might be a market for something, right the way through to an actual stable, understanding of where a product or service fits in a market and it's actually being sold. It actually has traction in the market. From that point of view, the important thing when we think about market readiness levels, and this is something, particularly of relevance, of course, is that we've seen that technology and the best technology in a particular product or services doesn't always succeed. It actually needs to be mixed. It needs to be brought together with this marketing, with this understanding of how you're going to translate the product or service technology into a marketable product. So market and technology readiness level is a product of the values of MRL and TRL that are applied to the product or service that you're actually developing. And within the software forum, we've actually set this up that it is a pure product between the two. Rather than any sort of weighting, we recognize the equal contribution for success in terms of technology and marketing. So from that point of view, and you can see here how we value the two different scores to provide as an outcome score a sort of idealized green zone of where you want your project to be once it's been assessed, where you can see an area where improvements could be made to move into that green zone, and where clear steps are needed to be taken to get you towards a satisfactory outcome. Now, of course, from the point of view of assessing projects or products for MTRL, the original way this was done was through personalized one-on-one interviews, and that's not particularly scalable. And therefore, within the Software Forum project, we will be utilizing an automated self-assessment questionnaire. We're going to be making this available through the Software Forum Project Hub and ask that projects themselves undertake their own assessments. The information that's collected is fairly minimal, and I'll go through that in detail in the next section. But we collect a set of general project information and then actual questions that we actually use to conduct the TRL, MRL, and MTRL assessments. And we automate those and provide a level of feedback on what could be done to increase or improve scores. So that draws this first section of the webinar together. And I know it was a very, very quick overview, but I've got a couple of minutes now for any questions that any of our participants have about the material that we've just covered. Just wait 20, 30 seconds just to see if anybody has any questions or has time to gestate a question before we move on to our next section. Okay, well, I'm going to move on to our next section now, which is the MTRL questions themselves, and then how we use those to calculate TRL, MRL, and MTRL as a product or outcome. So I mentioned that we were utilizing an automated questionnaire, and I've taken a screenshot of the questionnaire. It's actually an Excel, a templated Excel spreadsheet, and we collect two different types of information. The first of this is general project information, so details, contacts, authorizations, as you'd expect. And then we have 9 substantive questions, 2 of which feed into the TRL assessment and 7 which feed into the MRL assessment. So in terms of general project information, we collect, as you'd expect, details on the project, and also on the member of the project that's actually answering the questionnaire on the project's or product's behalf. And of course, the point behind this is to ensure that the person that's answering the questionnaire is authoritative for that project or product. Alongside that, and one of the ways that we make sure of that is we actually specifically ask for authorization in terms of publishing the results of the questionnaire and the MTRL assessment, in terms of publishing the name of the person that completed the assessment and their contact details. So once we've got the general project information, then of course we move on to the important questions within the questionnaire, those specific for assessing TRL and MRL. And just to say that these are 9 multiple choice questions with the responses scored from 1 to 5, where 1 is the, as it would suggest, the lowest level of preparedness for the answer to that question, and 5 is the most prepared. You can't leave any of the questions with 0. It will only allow you to leave the questions with 1 to 5. So let's start discussing those questions now. And the first question is actually about the project itself and asks about how mature the project is. And it is specifically aiming to understand where in the project life cycle this assessment is actually being done. Is it actually right at the beginning of the project where the work is really only just about beyond basic research and a technology concept, all the way through towards the end of a project life cycle where we would expect to see the product that's actually being developed by the project actually demonstrating some level of performance in an environment in which it was designed for. This can be considered at the least the large-scale prototype, but we would hope that it actually would be, we would be aiming towards something beyond the prototype phase into the product phase itself, and into a phase where we would see that there would be the availability of support for customers. So that's the first question. The second question is about then the product itself. So where is the product actually in its development cycle? So the first question was at the project that hosts the project or is developing the product, and the product then is the second question. And this is then around actually how well defined is the product that you're actually aiming to push towards external utilization, towards reuse, and towards customers effectively. The lowest level of this is, well, an initial product, has been defined and where it might fit into a market. We see then that we advance through pilot scale products, the sort of small scale prototypes, demonstration of full scale prototypes. Then, of course, once you've got beyond the prototype phase, you're likely to have any issues that you identified that if you're going to move this towards a commercialization. And then the highest score of 5 is available actually if you have a product or service that is ready to go and available for customers to use immediately. So those two questions were those that fed into the TRL. The third question is the first of the MRL specific questions, and it's about the project definition and design, and it has some overlap with the second question. We start off at the lowest level with one or more hypotheses of what the product or service is intended to do and the need with which it's going to actually answer, and how well and whether it's being designed. Then, of course, we see that once we've got past that initial stage, it's about mapping customer need to design outcomes and ensuring that there is a value proposition that you're going to get out of the continued design and development of this product. And we see then that the next 3 answers are about increasing scaling. Scaled from laboratory to pilot, comprehensive value proposition model developed, understanding design specifications, certifications, etc. And then for all the way through to actual having a complete final product design optimized with feedback from potential customers, etc. I.e. that we really understand and that we can take this straight to actually construct an outcome, a product that is actually going to have some success in the market. Question 4 then is actually dealing with competition. It's very clear that unless you're incredibly lucky, you're going to be entering a marketplace with a product or service where there may be existing or incumbents already there. So how well have you actually understood the competitive marketplace that you're going to be entering, and how you're going to show your novelty or the unique selling point? So question 4 is all about understanding, actually market research, knowledge of applications and the competitive landscape is the lowest level. Different types of market research have been conducted to get higher scores, all the way through to a full, complete understanding of the competitive landscape. You understand the target within that landscape, that the application, service or product that you're actually going to be launching is going to sit. You understand where all the competitors are and how to ensure that you are not really sitting behind them in any product development, and the market is clear where you are going to sit. Question 5 is of course as far as certainly as I can see, the most important, and it's actually about who's actually making the product. The team of people, and it does need to be a team because of the different and varied roles actually that are going to be engaged in taking your initial design, your initial idea through to the creation of the product, its launch into a marketplace, and then hopefully its success. The lowest level here, of course, is that there is no team, that it's just maybe one single person, there's no legal entity. And one of the reasons you'll see, and this connects to a future question, of course, with no legal entity, it's very difficult to ensure the IP protection and everything else. We can see here then that we get further on from no one through actually, the founders running an organization, And we've seen in the past, of course, we've seen many successful activities like this, but we also see that most of the time the original founders of some sort of technical startup or similar bring others on board who are experienced at areas of the non-technical domain so that they can actually very quickly think about how they will make a success of their move into the marketplace. Right the way through, the highest score here, of course, is that you have a fully balanced team of technical and marketing, customer service, operations, actually as an organization. And you are an organization, a legal entity, so that you can actually take this forward as a service or a product or outcome that not only are you going to satisfy the business side of, but also your customers are going to have confidence in actually obtaining your product from them. So question 6, documentation. Now, of course, when you start off, you're developing a technical product or service, you would hope will start off with technical documentation. And this is the lowest level of documentation. This might be software documentation, this might be design documentation. And we see that each of the increasing scores here essentially creates a new layer of documentation and builds on the previous layers all the way through. So from technical descriptions and documentation, we have user-orientated documentation, there's demonstration and marketing resources or demonstration resources, there's actual backup papers, backup documentation to validate the product claims within the marketplace. And then finally, documentation around marketing. The business model canvas is used as an example here to showcase how all of this fits together into a uniform way that different stakeholders will be able to understand the product or service that you're actually creating. The next question is about intellectual property management. And this is a very important area, of course, to say that you have to make sure that you've defined what the IPR is within the product or service. You have to protect that IPR, even if you're making this through, for example, open source software. You need to make sure that an appropriate license has been attached to that software. Otherwise, different organizations may struggle to make use of that if they have rules internally about whether or not they're allowed to use externally sourced material. So you can see here, the first level, well, no IPR has been defined. Well, you can understand that is the lowest level. Means of protection's been considered. You've started to discuss, for example, within some form of collaboration document that IPR needs to be defined. Definition of shares, how in an organization or a product that's created by multiple people, how is the IPR actually divided between the original creators of it? Exploitation rights are defined at the next level. And then finally, you have a full contract that defines everything about how you're going to manage IPR in the short, medium, and long term. The next step is then the go-to-market. How are you actually going to take that step into the market? What's the business model that you're intending to actually utilize? And what's the clear value proposition that your product or service actually has and claims to sit within the market? This is going to then connect with your customers, that you've actually have some feedback from customers, that you've connected with an understanding of the broader market, and that translates into requirements, and that is in turn satisfied through things like user stories, and you can understand all of the steps that you're going to take from initially launching through to making something actually available as a product or service with customers. And that's particularly important when you're thinking about the beforehand. How are you going to understand, the value chain? How are you going to actually have agreements with suppliers or partners that may be involved in actually taking this to market to ensure that you're successful. And then finally, of course, and this is a slightly more difficult one to consider when you're thinking about software, but still bear with me on this, of course, is actually around manufacturing in your supply chain. Actually, have we got an idea around, the suppliers, partners, customers, and the value chain analysis? So who is providing some of this? And from a software point of view, this might be, for example, what about dependent libraries that your software tool, your tool or product actually requires? How are they being maintained? Are they open source and you're going to have to onboard those, or are they a commercial outcome that you need to then understand what the licensing arrangement is so that you can then sell your product or service onwards? All the way through here, we can see that again, and as with all of these questions, we have an increasing, an oniony type layer of each one. Each answer builds on top of the previous ones. But we get towards, understanding, actually what the manufacturing process is going to be, and this within a software context may be, for example, the development mechanisms that you're going to take. Are you going to have frequent releases? Are you going to operate your development in an agile manner with fast, frequent outputs? How are you actually going to operate your business to generate your product? And this goes all the way through to actually having products out there. You're going to have manufacturing, you're deploying your product to customers, and you've got people that are actually using it. And we would hope, of course, that they're happy in the utilization of this, of your product or service. So, of course, we've made progress. We've asked, you as a product or a project owner have looked through these questions, you've actually, answered these questions, you've given them some scores. We need to obviously then turn them into something useful in terms of actually creating the understanding of TRL, MRL, and hence MTRL. And I'm going to go through TRL, MRL first, and then talk about MTRL. So how do we actually come up with a value from the answers to your questions for TRL? And we've essentially got a little bit of maths here to describe how this is done. The TRL, as I mentioned, is actually calculated from the answers to project maturity and product development questions, with, in a special single case, the answer to product definition and design also being included. And you can see here that if the project maturity and product development, if the answer to the TRL level is project maturity answer, if the project maturity answer is whatever that is, and the product development answer is less than or equal to 2. So that means that's for low TRLs. That takes you from TRL 1 to 5. And what we say here is actually that really the likelihood of being at a higher TRL than 5 if your project is not mature is not going to be the case. And that's around some of the definitions for the TRL as much as anything as well. Moving beyond TRL level 5, we then get into different ways that we're calculating this. And this then takes as a sum the answer from the product development question and the project maturity question, -1, for 2 different cases. And I'll take the second one before the first one here. And that's if product development is 2, i.e. you're not that well developed actually as a product, and your project maturity is 5, i.e. your project is very mature, and your product definition or design is more than 2, i.e. you have a design, your product is not yet that well developed, but it is developed to some extent, but your project is very well developed, then you'll be TRL level 6. And then above this, to get above TRL level 6, then if your product development is more than 2, and your project maturity is 5, then you will get TRL's levels from TRL 7 up to 9. So that's how we calculate TRL as a numeric value from the answers to the questions that I ran through earlier. Now, let's deal with MRL. So first of all, this is of course dealt with in a different manner. We have many more questions to understand the inputs into the calculation of MRL. And the first, of course, is to recognize from the 7 different areas that these are of different levels of importance. And to recognize that, we introduce these weightings. And you can see here that we consider the team and the makeup of the team to be the most important criteria in the MRL. And we define the intellectual property management as the least important, so as the lowest weighting. And we can see here, and one of the things that I'd like to ask of those, the members of the audience, if they would comment, and I'll bring this slide back up at the end so that we can see these weightings, because I'd like to ask the audience what they think about the ordering of these weightings, particularly from maybe their own experience. So once we've got these weightings, we then of course have the answers to the questions that we've done previously. So how do we then translate these into a numeric value for MRL? So we have the value per category, which is the answer to the question times its weighting. And each category also has a maximum value, which is the 5, i.e. the highest possible rating, times the weighting. And the MRL is then the floor value, or the rounded down value, of 9 times the division of weighted answers by sum of weighted answers by the sum of maximum weighted answers. It's 9 because the scale goes up to 9, so that's why we have 9. And then, of course, as I mentioned earlier, MTRL is a simple product. It's the MRL multiplied by TRL to give you an overall value. So I'm going to briefly pause here, and I'm going to ask whether from members of our audience there's any comments, particularly on the weightings that we apply to the MRL questions. And I'm just going to quickly pop back to slide 27 to highlight those if any of our audience would like to make a comment or have any questions. Okay, I don't think we don't have any questions at this stage, although I will, of course, have time and availability for questions at the end more generally. So then we've got our numeric values. What do we then do with them? And particularly with, from your point of view as a product or project owner, how do you actually then take these numeric values and then think about understanding how you can get value from the inputs that we're making? So how do we interpret the results of the MTRL analysis? So, what we want to do, of course, is we will give you scores. You will receive a TRL score, an MRL score, and a product MTRL score. But the most important thing, of course, we would hope is that you will value these inputs and actually want to understand how you can improve your scores. And from the MTRL analyses that I've done recently, the very first question that I receive always is, okay, how do we do what do we do to improve our score? What can we do better? So these are very key things. But first, let's have a look at some of the advice that's actually built into the automated questionnaire itself, so that you can understand, what the questionnaire tells you before coming to the Software Forum project and actually having maybe a one-on-one consultancy with the team on how you can actually understand how to improve your MTRL scores. So first of all, the commentary that you receive for your TRL scores, and these are defined, of course, on the TRL level that you're actually receiving. So first of all, if your product development is less than or equal to 2, i.e. you either answered that as the initial product or market fit's been defined, or the pilot scale product has been tested in the intended environment close to the expected performance, a prototype system, and project maturity is 1, i.e. project work is beyond basic research and technology concepts as being defined, then your TRL, remember, is level 1, and the input that we'll give to you is that really you're still finishing your basic research. What you've actually got to do is advance your technology formulation about how you're going to turn basic research into a product. If project maturity is 2, well, your TRL level 2, and well, you've formulated your technology. Well, let's try and advance this to applied research. Let's try and actually put this into a context of how it might be useful as a product or service to someone. When we get to project maturity level 3, so that's preliminary testing of technology components has begun in a laboratory environment. Well, you're doing applied research by definition at that point, and you need to validate those results which are in your little proof of concept. You need to move to actually validate those in a broader, more controlled environment that's outside of specifically just your laboratory. Level 4, you've reached the prototype phase. It's still, early. What you need to do, of course, is then scale this. So taking your small scale prototype and understand how you're going to scale. And that might not be building a bigger product. That might be how are you going to reach more different use cases or use possible users of your product to actually take it to the next level. And for TRL 5, well, you've finished prototype. You've done that in the intended environment. What you've then got to do actually is take that outside to external users and an external system so that you can understand how it's going to scale from a customer point of view. So then we have this special case for TRL level 6, and I mentioned here that this includes the product design definition and design question answer being more than 3. Then you're at TRL level 6. Your project is at the validation. The point being actually that you're doing performance analysis at this point, and you're understanding how your product or service actually is going to perform when you're not hand-holding it on you're not running it in a sort of heroic demonstration manner, but you're actually allowing a customer to utilize it on their own, and then expecting them to understand how that is going to be used, to understand how it might fit into their systems or services, and how they should then actually make use of it. So for TRL level 7, well, you're in a pre-commercial phase. You're just about to launch your product or service. It's in the environment that's actually, that it's actually going to operate in, and it may not be yours. And, this is all about actually understanding how you make that initial launch into the commercial environment, how you understand to push your product into being a commercial outcome. TRL level 8, well, you are at a level 8 by definition, you are actually a commercially available system at that point. And at level 9, you know, you're fully out there in the market, you're a commercial product or service, but actually don't stand still. Think about how you're going to take your product or service, how you're going to evolve it, and how you're going to improve it so that your customer base may broaden, or your user community may see different ways they can use the existing service in new manners. So that's the commentary that we give you as a person that's completed an assessment for TRL. For MRL, the commentary is organized in a different manner. First of all, if the MRL value is less than 4, it's very clear that your results are not in a marketable phase. So from that point of view, you know, it's clear to say you've got a long way to go before you should be thinking about launching this product or service into the marketplace. So that's just the first step. Once you get above MRL, once you are at MRL level 4, then the values of other questions come in, and we highlight the particular level of importance in the ordering of some of the guidance or input that we try to give. So if you're at MRL level 4, the first thing we say, if the answer to teams that was low, so actually you could start by improving your team, understanding who are the actors that you need to bring on board over and above the original founders of the product or service. Who do you need to bring on board to actually make this team a success? From terms of manufacturing and supply chain, well, you need to understand, you know, much better what your supply chain is, your dependence on your supply chain, and make sure you have a clear level of understanding of how that is going to affect the product or service that you're going to launch. Go-to-market, well, improve your go-to-market strategy, and this is all about understanding your customer base, your customer requirements, and the business model that you're actually going to employ as a product in terms of how it's going to be sold, you know, or made available. You know, are you going to make something open source if you're a software project, but you're going to sell services on top of it? Or are you going to sell shrink wrap software? So what's the go-to-market strategy you're going to employ for this particular product or service? For the product itself, of course, well, you need to actually make sure that you have your design nailed down, that we want to improve this. You know, this is particularly important. You need to make sure that you've actually got your product definition well set, your design well set, and you have all of the input that you need to take this on to the next level. You need to understand your competition, and you'll see here actually that we suggest the steps that could be taken to improve your score are in the order of importance that we talked about, the weightings from earlier. So we've got competitive landscape, documentation, and IPR. So once then your MRL is over level 4, then if your MRL is level 5, then we actually say, well, you know, you've got some aspects of your preparation that's, you know, to market to do, but if your TRL at the same time is over 4, then actually you will be at a point to have external validation. So this just links together with that assessment that I mentioned, the assessment of TRL, to actually say, well, okay, you might have a lowish TRL, 5 is still fairly low, but your MRL is enough that you can compensate for that. For MRL less than 8, well, you know, this is you're ready to be commercialized. But an important thing from our point of view within SWForum is that we'd like you to consider how you might use the SWForum forum to market project results, to actually make them available and accessible to people, so that potential customers, potential reusers of your technologies can actually very clearly see the value that your product or service brings to the marketplace. And of course, if you're at or equal to MRL level 9, well, by definition, you're selling your product in the service, it's stable, you have a successful activity, don't rest on your laurels, but you know, there's not much more that we can give as inputs at that stage. MTRL, of course, is, as I mentioned earlier, the product of those two values of TRL and MRL. And one of the things that the automated questionnaire does is actually provides you with a little visualization of so you can understand where you are in MTRL space for your particular assessment. And one of the reasons for this is you can actually then, when you have repeated assessments, see a movement and see the general trend, which should be towards the top right in both in the MTRL space. So you can see how your product is moving, and it's not guaranteed, even though you're moving in time, that your product, your scoring will move in a smooth manner up into that top right-hand corner either. So that's a visualization to allow you to understand where you sit in the MTRL space. So from our point of view and from your point of view as a product or service owner, well, you know, when should you use MTRL? What's the best point? And what we would say actually is that it depends how you use it and when you use it as to what can be the best result. You know, from the point of view of, you know, before a project even starts, you can actually use MTRL around other products or services that you might be building your own project on. So making sure that so that you understand where your supply chain is, you could actually do a brief MTRL assessment on dependencies that you're bringing into your project to actually say and make clear within your proposal that you understand the quality of dependencies. So you understand how you might actually need to strengthen a particular dependency, and this could make your project pitch or proposal stronger. Then, of course, your project has been funded and you've been successful. Well, you know, actually, we've seen and do suggest that MTRL can be used for project planning to understand to highlight the areas within the development of the project which need to be strengthened so that you can understand how you're going to make a success of the product or service that your project is actually building. And then, of course, well, you know, your project is coming towards the end. You've built a product or service, but actually, how do you launch this into the market? And, you know, from this point of view, MTRL is a useful tool that can be used to formulate a go-to-market strategy. So just to summarize, I've talked about the fact that we have automated MTRL assessments, that we actually provide a basic commentary on TRL and MRL to highlight the possible next steps that could be made by a product or service owner to improve their score, but more importantly, to make a success of the launch into the marketplace, to actually create those, to actually bolster those points that I mentioned right at the beginning around activities around impact, reuse, those post end of project goals that we would like to see all projects have. And then I've talked about the fact that we create this visualization so that you can understand the results that you get from an MTRL assessment and see how that can actually be used to track project progress through its lifetime. So for the final time, I'd like to open the floor to questions or comments from our audience. So I'm not sure. Oh, okay, from John. Thank you, John. Although the quality of the team may well be the most important factor, I can imagine it'd be really difficult to judge the quality, given the human element. Okay, yes. So from our point of view, so one of the questions there is how you clearly identify the roles within the team. Now, it's not necessarily a one-on-one, you know, you need one person that's doing marketing, you need one person that's technical, you need one person that's doing the business planning, but you need to understand who is going to take those roles on. And the team may be a different scale depending on the outcome, the product or service that you're launching, but you need that ownership of the particular part of the problem to be made. Okay, so I would like to thank all of our audience for participation in today's SWForum.eu webinar. I'm going to draw the webinar to a close. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and say thank you very much to everyone. And I hope you'll join us in the near future for the third webinar in this series, where we'll actually walk through an assessment with a volunteer project and understand how they've answered the questions and how we can then provide input into them to help improve their project. So thank you very much, everyone, and I hope to see you again soon. Goodbye.